Hi, everybody. So, my name is Kristen Jane Anderson, and I kind of decided to do this live video sort of last minute. I have really felt like I should be doing more videos like this, but I really have kind of a introverted, shy personality, so it's been really hard for me to do live videos like this. I did do a couple of them, but I'm just always really awkward about it. So sorry about that. I just really want to get more comfortable with it because I really feel like I need to do whatever I can to help people learn from my mistakes and the choices that I made and the things that I've learned through my mistakes. So if you're here, please say hi. I would love to just welcome you, and I'm going to talk through my story, but I'm going to do it a little bit quicker than I have in the past, kind of like a shortened version, which I think might be more easy for more people to listen to. But I also want to talk about some of the things that people have asked me about and the what I've learned and the way that I've answered them. So anyways, if you're here, say hi. Hi, Ray. Thank you for joining me. My family is actually eating lunch out today, so I thought this would be a perfect time for me to do a video while the house was quiet. So anyways, I'm going to start out from my story from the beginning, and again, like I said, I'm going to go a little bit slower than usual, or give you a shorter version than usual. If you've ever heard me speak or if you watched my live videos in the past. But I grew up in Chicago, actually about an hour north of Chicago in the suburbs. And thank you, Ray. That is awesome. I'm glad you have my book on your shelf. That's so cool to hear. And growing up, I had a really good childhood. I mean, most people, when they hear my story, they're kind of surprised that I had such a good childhood because of where I ended up when I was in high school. But I did have a good childhood. My parents were married. I had everything I needed. I had most of what I wanted. And I thought life was always going to be really wonderful and carefree. I had an older brother. I had an older sister, and they were pretty good to me. I just thought life would always be really wonderful. But like most people and children in junior high, around the ages of like 12, 13 years old, I started to realize that the world just wasn't as great as I thought it was, that people weren't as genuine as I thought they were. And that was really hard for me to accept, really hard for me to wrap my head around. And I started, some of the things that I realized were that, like, homelessness, for example, was a big issue where I lived. Sexual abuse was just a real thing that happened, that there were wars going on in the world. And as burdened as I became by everything I was learning about, I wanted to do something to make a difference in the world, to try and make this world a little bit better of a place. So I started volunteering at our local homeless shelter every Friday night. I think it was for about a year. And that was when I was in 7th grade. And at the end of that year, I felt like I really hadn't helped many people, because I looked around and homelessness just looked like it was just as much of an issue a year later after I had been volunteering as it was when I had started. So I felt like I wasn't making much of a difference in the world. Hi, Abby. And I just wanted to, put helping other people in the back of my mind as I went into high school. I just tried to focus on making myself, my family, and my friends happy. And the first couple years of high school went by pretty smoothly. I had a lot of friends. It felt like I had a lot of friends. I was on the soccer team. My boyfriend was prom king. Like, from the outside looking in, most people thought I was doing really well. If you can hear my dog barking, I'm sorry. I think he just sees somebody walking on the street. But anyways, people looking at my life from the outside, I think thought I was doing really well. And even I felt like I was doing really well. But things started to go downhill pretty quickly, and that's kind of hard for me to talk about, but I lost several friends within about a year and a half's time. I lost a friend to a car accident, one because of a motorcycle accident, one because of a brain tumor, and one because of suicide. And I can't say that they were like my best friends or anything, but the friend that I lost to suicide is the one who affected me the most, but they all really affected me. I really hadn't ever lost anybody in my life until that point. And on top of those friends that I lost my grandmother, I was raped, and I was stalked by 2 young men. So all of that happened within about a year and a half's time, and my parents didn't know about everything that was happening. They didn't know I was raped. They didn't know how deeply my friends' deaths had affected me, and neither did my friends. They didn't know the whole story. I was in denial about the rape big time. I really wanted to believe that didn't even happen. I sort of pretended that it never happened, and I tried to go on with my life as normal, but I started physically getting sick every day, and I just spiraled down into a really deep depression. I was physically getting sick every day. I was skipping classes, I was skipping school, and I was doing everything I could to numb the pain that I felt on the inside. I was smoking, I was drinking, I was making very careless choices. If people asked me how I was doing, I would say things like, I'm here, sort of like, isn't that good enough? Because I just was in such a dark place, and I didn't want to be here very much anymore. I would also say things like life sucks all of the time because I meant it so seriously. So during that time, my parents were trying to help me. They knew something was wrong. They didn't know really how badly I was doing because I couldn't have said how badly I was doing. I couldn't have put words to it. I didn't know how to describe how I was feeling and everything that had happened. But they knew something was wrong, so they took me to a lot of doctors and a lot of counselors. And one of the things the doctors and the counselors said over and over again is that it seemed like I was dealing with stress and anxiety. Everybody said stress and anxiety. After all the physical tests and even counselors, they said it was stress and anxiety after everything that I had been through. But nobody ever used the word depression. And because of that, we just kind of moved forward like normal. I was put on some medication, but I moved forward like normal, and I continued to slide down into that dark and scary depression that I had started to fall into. And eventually New Year's Eve of my senior year came, and I was supposed to come home that night, but I didn't. I remember before I left arguing with my parents about what time I would come home. I had wanted to sleep at a friend's house, and they wanted me to come home after midnight. So we argued back and forth about what time I would come home, and I left sort of deciding that even though I told them I would come home, I really wasn't going to. And I went to the pizza restaurant that I'd been working at right after that, and my friends picked me up. We went to a party, and strangely, I felt like I was making a lot of good decisions. Even though I wasn't going to go home that night, I felt like I could still be a good kid. So I didn't drink that night. I was a designated driver for my friends, and I just felt like at least I was making a lot of other good decisions. But at midnight, I called my mom to tell her I wasn't coming home. Hi, Sarah. Good to see you too. So I just hung up the phone before they could even say anything. I just wanted them to know that I wasn't going to be home. And it wasn't until the next day around 10 o'clock in the morning when I did come home. And because my parents were always very loving, very involved, very concerned with me and my life, they were just beside themselves. I remember one of the things my mom said when I came home was, Kristen, we didn't know if you were dead in a ditch somewhere or what had happened to you. And I felt terrible. I felt so bad because I really was not trying to worry them or hurt them or make them upset. I was really just trying to help myself feel a little bit better. That's really what characterized the several months before that day. I just was doing whatever made me feel better because I was struggling so much. And so my parents, because they didn't know, again, how badly I was doing, how much I was struggling, they thought they needed to punish me for the choices I made. They thought I was just being rebellious. So they told me that the things I'd gotten were going to be taken away and either given to somebody who would appreciate them or returned to the store. And that was hard for me because at that time in my life as a teenager, I was just very materialistic. I found a lot of my value in the clothes that I had and the way that I looked. And to be grounded until further notice, which was the other part of my punishment, was really hard because at that point I was really pretty much living for my friends, I think. So when I'm sorry, the light on my computer just went to sleep. Okay. So when I got my punishment. It was really hard to just accept, really hard to swallow, but I was very tired because I'd been up the whole night before, so I went to sleep that day. And I slept the whole day and the whole night until the next morning, which was a Sunday morning. And growing up in my family, just that on Sundays, we always went to church every Sunday. So that Sunday, like every other, we went to church. And I went into church and I went out feeling exactly the same way. Pretty broken, pretty lost, disillusioned, confused. And I remembered when I got home that I wanted to watch these videos of my nephews. I thought that putting the videos on would just cheer me up a little bit, so I watched the videos of them opening their Christmas presents, and it did put a smile on my face. It cheered me up a little bit, but then my best friend called, and her name was Kelly, and we'd been friends since we were in second grade, and she wanted me to come over to her house to make gingerbread houses, and I knew I wasn't supposed to be going anywhere because I was grounded until further notice. But we didn't always make the best decisions together, so I decided that if I left, I probably couldn't get in any worse trouble. So I very dishonestly wrote a note to my parents saying that I was going for a walk, and I walked to the end of the street where a friend picked me up and took me to Kelly's house, and we hung out there for about 3 hours. We never made gingerbread houses, and about 3 hours later, another friend dropped me off at the end of the street. They did that because they didn't want to get in trouble for taking me when I was supposed to be grounded. So as I started to walk home, I just felt like I don't know, I wasn't ready. It's not that I couldn't go home. It's not that I didn't have a loving, welcoming family. I just was so empty. I was so broken. I just had nothing left. So I walked to the pizza restaurant that I worked at. I knew that I had to pick up my paycheck from there. And while I was there, I got a pack of cigarettes. Smoking was something that I had also begun doing to just try to numb the pain that I felt on the inside. And as I was there, I wasted time as best as I could until I felt like I was ready to go home. I just kind of was waiting for that moment, and I never really felt ready to go home, and I think it had more to do with not feeling ready to deal with real life again. So I walked, eventually I left because I just didn't want my parents to worry about me any more than they already had the other night. So I started to walk home, and as I started to walk home, it was almost like my legs wouldn't take me there. I just felt totally empty. So I walked to the park that I grew up playing in, and this is a park that I grew up playing in all the time, swimming at the beach, swinging on the swings, basketball, volleyball, you name it. So as I got there, I started to swing on the swings, and I started to remember these happy, joyful childhood memories that I had in that park as a child playing all the time. And I started to contrast those happy, joyful childhood memories that I had with how I was feeling now as a teenager, very broken, disillusioned, lost, confused, and I felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't go back, I couldn't move forward. I felt like no matter how much I hoped, no matter how much I believed, no matter how much I prayed, I was just going in circles. Things were not getting better. In many ways, it seemed like they were getting worse. It felt like just one bad thing after another, after another, after another was happening, and I got more disillusioned, more lost, more confused. And then I remembered in this small town that I grew up in, you're not supposed to be in the park after dark. And that was something that I knew, but I was never usually there that late at night. But I knew that if the police came, they would make me go home. But going home wasn't something I really was ready for. I just wanted some more time to think still. So I looked around to see where else I could go. And I saw a train that had been parked on the edge of at the edge of the park. There were train tracks, and it had been parked there, I thought, for probably about 3 weeks because I'd driven by and it hadn't moved at all, so I figured it wasn't going anywhere. And as I went over to the train and sat on it, I remembered a thought process that I'd had about 3 months beforehand, and that was as I was grieving through my friend Brandon's death. And his death was the hardest for me because I just, like many of my friends, I just couldn't understand how he could do that, why he would do it, why he would do the way that he did it. It was just very troubling. And I remember as I was grieving through his death 3 months earlier thinking I could never do that. I could never take my life, especially the way that he did it. But then my thought process just started to change, and I started to think, well, if I ever did it, how would I do it? If I wouldn't ever do it the way that he did it, how would I do it if I ever did it, even though I would never do it? Because I knew I wouldn't do it the way that he did it. It was really complicated. But as I thought through that, a number of things went through my mind, things I thought about, heard about, read about, or seen on TV, and none of them seemed like they would necessarily work or be good enough until a train went by my parents' house. And we lived about a block from the train, and every time a train went by, including at this moment, I could feel the train shake our home. I could hear the whistle blare through the windows, and it just sort of snapped in my mind. That's one way I could never live through it. And I didn't think about it again, hi Mark, until 3 months later when I was sitting on the train that day. And I was obviously in a very dark place. I had never really considered suicide as an option or as an answer. I just didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know what to do anymore. So I remembered that thought process, and I started in that moment to consider suicide as an option or as an answer. I just didn't know what else to do. But I was very back and forth in my mind, and I would think things like, there's a reason I'm here, and then I would think there's no reason I'm here. I would think there's something I'm supposed to do here, and then I would think there's nothing I'm supposed to do here. I would think it's going to get better, and then I would think it's not going to get any better. And I was back and forth like that for probably about an hour and a half about a half an hour until a train started to come. And when the train started to come, I just wasn't ready. I hadn't made a decision. I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't want to die. I just wanted my life to get a little bit easier. I wanted it to be a little less painful. I wanted it to be not so hard. So as the train approached, I felt like I had to make some sort of a decision or go somewhere, and I just didn't know. I had pretty much lost all hope that my life was ever going to get any better. And I knew that I had to make some sort of a decision or do something because it was so cold out. I had gloves on and a winter coat, but I could see my breath in the air. It was late at night. It was the middle of winter, and I just knew I had to do something or go somewhere. So right before the train got to me in that completely hopeless place I was in, I decided to get off the train I was sitting on and lay down on the tracks where the other train was approaching. And I remember trying to push down the fear and the shame that I felt in the inside because I knew this wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. I knew this wasn't the answer. I just didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was so lost and so hopeless. So thank you, Darren. So I laid down on the tracks, and it was only about a split second before the train started to go over me. And what I felt when the train started to go over me is I felt it begin to suck my hair, my head, and the midsection of my body upward. And very quickly after that, I felt something push me down and hold me down into the ground. And I didn't know what was happening in the moment. I had no idea what that was. I just remember something pushing me down, holding me down firmly into the ground, and eventually hearing the roar, the squeaking of the train come to a stop. And I had no idea what to think. I didn't know if I was alive. I didn't know if I was dead. I didn't know what had just happened. So I looked around, I unclenched my eyes, I unclenched my fist, opened my eyes, and as I looked around, I looked behind me to my right, and about 10 feet behind me on my right, I saw my legs. And I knew that they were my legs because they had these bright white tennis shoes on them that I'd just gotten for Christmas. But it felt like that was a terrible nightmare. This could not be my reality. This could not be really happening. This just had to be a really bad dream. I had no idea what to think. So I used my arms to crawl out from underneath the train so that I could look down at my legs and see what had really happened. And as I got on the side of the tracks, I started to look down at my legs, and when I looked at my left leg, it had been severed so high that I couldn't see anything there, and I decided to turn my attention to my right leg, and my right leg looked like it had been severed below the knee, but I'd never even seen an amputated leg before, or my leg like that before, so I just was confused, and I decided to take my hand and run it below where it looked like it had been severed, And when I did that, I unintentionally brought my hand up to my face. And it's so hard for me to describe this moment, but the best way for me to describe it is when I saw the blood and I realized my legs were gone, the pain hit me in a much more loud, in your face sort of way. When the train was going over me, I felt pain, but it was much more of a dull in the background sort of pain. And once I got off the tracks, I looked down at my legs, I realized they were gone and I was still alive. It was a much more loud, in your face sort of pain, if I can put it that way. I was crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life. I was definitely in the worst pain I had ever been in my life, crying for my mom the way that a small child would. And when I share that part of the story, it's always really hard for my mom because she was actually out looking for me. And she wonders if she just didn't hear me, but I'm sure she could have never heard me. But in that moment, crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life, for my mom, in the worst pain I had ever been in my life, I really feel like God came near. All of a sudden, I started to hear the song Amazing Grace play over and over and over in my mind, and this tremendous peace just started to cover me. And as I heard this song play over and over in my mind, I started to think that could only be music from heaven. I thought I just needed to lay there and wait to die, wait to lose enough blood, whatever. I just thought I needed to lay there and wait. So I laid there hoping, praying, and waiting to die. And it was not long before I felt somebody pull my hair off my face and behind my ear. And I wasn't expecting anybody to find me. I really didn't want anybody to find me. It was very shameful, very uncomfortable. But it says in the police report that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." The yellow flash that they had seen was my bright yellow jacket as I laid down on the tracks. So they had called 911, and since they had called 911, a number of paramedics and firefighters had been walking the tracks trying to find me. And this was the first person who did find me. And as he pulled my hair off my face and behind my ear, and I looked up at him, he sort of stumbled backwards because he wasn't even expecting me to be alive. And I, of course, wasn't expecting to still be alive. But he radioed to the other medical personnel of my location and my status. They determined that they wanted to take me in a Flight for Life helicopter about an hour north in Milwaukee to a hospital there. But they found out it was too cold and foggy out, so they couldn't take me in a helicopter. They needed to do something different. So they did something that they've never done since. They've never, that wasn't protocol, that they had never done beforehand. And this was that they blocked all of the roads and the intersections from where I was to the closest hospital in the area that could take me. It says in the police report that it's normally a 45-minute drive, but that they got me there in 8 minutes. And when I got to the hospital, I didn't really understand everything that was happening. I remember them asking my name, my parents' names, their phone number, my sister's name, her phone number, and I answered all of their questions. And not long after that, I heard a bunch of the nurses and doctors talking in the corner, mostly nurses, I think, about how they felt like they were witnessing some sort of a miracle. And that was confusing for me on many levels, because I didn't really feel like a miracle. I didn't even necessarily want to be a miracle. Unfortunately, at that point in my life, or in the story, I just still didn't really want to be here. And so I remember I found out later that the reason that they were saying that is because I had lost 8 pints of blood, and scientifically you're supposed to die after you lose 5. But I obviously was still very much alive, conscious, and talking, able to answer all of their questions about my parents' names and sisters and their phone numbers. And again, I didn't really feel like a miracle. I didn't really want to be a miracle. But as they wheeled me down to the operating room to get started, I asked the doctor if he thought I was going to live or die. And I was looking for some sort of reassurance for him. I really didn't, again, really want to live. I just didn't have it in me at that point. And so I was looking for some sort of reassurance from him, and he told me he didn't know if I was going to live or die. And he says that he told me that because he wanted me to go into surgery fighting that night, fighting to live, fighting to die. And I was in surgery the whole night. They tried to reattach my legs, and they did a number of blood transfusions in order to help keep me alive. But reattaching my legs is something they weren't successful at doing. And it wasn't until the next day when they stopped operating on me and I woke up in intensive care. And I remember the first time that I woke up, I saw my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, and my brother-in-law all in the room with their arms crossed and their heads looking down at the floor. And my first thought was, wow, something really bad must have just happened, because I didn't remember all the events from the night before right away. But my mom's eyes met with mine. She ran to the side of my bed and she said, "Oh, honey, we're so glad you're okay." And the memories started to flood back. And I said, "Mom, they cut my clothes and they cut my coat." And she said, "It's okay. We can get you new ones. We're just glad you're okay." And I sort of fell back asleep. I was on a lot of medication. And the next thing I remember was waking up because my doctor came to tell me what my injuries were. And that wasn't something I was ready for. I feel like I was really rude to the doctor, even though he was trying to just give me some hope for the future. He came in to tell me that my left leg was severed well above the knee, that my right leg was severed directly below the knee, but that I might be able to walk with the use of prosthetic legs one day. And I know that he was just trying to, give it to me straight, but also give me some hope for the future. But I just wasn't ready for it. I was really not ready for it. So I stared out the window the whole time he was there. I didn't say hi, I didn't say bye, I didn't say thank you. I just couldn't believe that this was my new reality. I was in denial again. And then I remember falling asleep. Again, I was still on a lot of medication, pain meds and whatnot. But as I woke up the next time, I don't know if it was how many days later, but the next time I woke up, I just felt sort of gross and icky. I hadn't showered in days, and I know that I must have had blood, sweat, and tears on me, so I just felt really gross. And I asked my mom, who was in the room, if she would get my friend Kelly on the phone, if I could talk to Kelly, and if I could have her come and help me get cleaned up a little bit. I wanted to have her come and maybe do my hair or my makeup, something just to make me feel a little bit cleaner. And so she said that'd be fine, and she got Kelly on the phone right away. Sarah, thank you for sharing that. That is amazing. She got Kelly on the phone right away, and as soon as I started to talk to Kelly, I just felt like I needed to tell her what had just happened. I think that my family might have just got back. The dog is barking again. I'm sorry. But anyway, as soon as I got on the phone with Kelly, she told me she asked me how I was doing, and I hadn't been asked that from anybody yet at that point. Nobody asked me how I was doing, and I felt like I just had to tell her something. We had been friends since we were in second grade, and something serious and crazy had just happened to me, so I knew I had to tell her something. And as I looked down at my legs to see if they were still gone, even with a blanket or sheets covering my legs, I could tell that they were still mostly gone. So I just said to her, "I'm okay, but my legs are cut off." And that was the moment that I realized that this was real, that this was really happening, that my legs were really gone, that they probably were never coming back, that this was my new reality, that this wasn't just a bad dream, this wasn't just a nightmare. And as I said it, "I'm okay, but my legs are cut off," tears just streamed down my face, because I knew that this was not just a bad dream. And as I was crying, she just said to me, "Oh, honey, you're going to be fine. You don't need your legs. You're going to be just fine." And some people think that's so simple, that's so trite. How could she have just said that? But it was exactly what I needed to hear. I really think I just needed to know that she thought I was going to be just fine with or without my legs. That gave me a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement in that moment. And I was in the hospital for a long time, off and on, but especially right in the beginning for the first few months. But one of the things that happened during those months, my husband just walked in, he brought me lunch. Sorry. Anyways, one of the things that happened in that time is all of my friends and all of my family just surrounded me and loved on me like crazy. Victoria, thank you for sharing. I hope it really does help them. And they loved on me like crazy. I almost feel like more than ever before, which is very unfortunate. But one of the things they told me that I hadn't really heard before was Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. I heard it so much that I almost got sick of it because I didn't know why I was here or what I was supposed to do here. I was still in that dark, depressed state. I just didn't really have that fight in me yet. And so but the good thing about it is it really sent me searching, like, why would God keep me here? What would he ever want me to do here? And people worried, like, if I didn't want to live my life with my legs, how was I ever going to want to live my life without my legs? And that was a real thought of mine. Like, why would my problems are even worse now. My life is going to be even harder now. How am I ever going to be happy again? How am I ever going to want to, live like this? So anyways, I struggled a lot. I actually struggled with depression much worse after my suicide attempt and after I lost my legs than I did before. But one of the first times that we got out of the hospital just for the weekend, thank you, Christy, you're so sweet. God bless you too. One of the first times we got out of the hospital just for the weekend, on Sunday, we went back to church. And that weekend altogether was hard because I started to realize what my life was going to be like in a wheelchair without my legs, particularly at my parents' house. They had a lot of just really thick plush carpet. It was like 25 stairs up to my bedroom, so it was like completely inaccessible. My arms would just shake as I tried to wheel through the carpet or on the carpet, however you want to say it, and it was really, really hard. But on Sunday, we went back to church, and while I was there, a woman came up to me, and I didn't know her at all. She didn't know me at all, but she had heard about what happened to me, and she just kind of took it upon herself, even though I don't believe this is ever true. She told me that I would have went to hell if I died, and I think she told me that because I had attempted suicide. But I had never heard that from anybody before. Nobody in my circle had said anything like that, and I had kind of started to ponder questions like that. I started to realize that it was just a real blessing that I survived, that they told me it was a miracle because I lost 8 pints of blood, and scientifically you're supposed to die if you lose 5, and that I had been run over by 33 freight train cars at 55 miles per hour, so I really should have been torn to pieces, but obviously that isn't what happened to me. So I started to think about if I would have died, where I would have gone, and I just really wanted to know one way or another. I was in some ways, with time, more and more grateful that I had survived, but I wanted to know if I had not survived, where I would have been right then and there. So this lady telling me that I would have went to hell, even though I don't ever recommend just saying that to somebody, something good still came from it, because it did send me searching, because she's the only person who helped me kind of realize that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have went to heaven. Everybody else around me told me what I call the feel-good answer. They would say things like, "Oh, Kristen, of course you would have went to heaven. Don't worry about it." But I just really wanted to know the truth one way or another. So I started to pray about it, and not long afterward, a couple came to have dinner with our family. And this was a couple that we didn't really spend a lot of time with or know very well. They were actually friends of my sister's, but they wanted to come over and just encourage us after everything that we had been through. So they came over for dinner one night, and I found out after dinner that the husband of this couple was in seminary to be a pastor. And I didn't really meet a lot of pastors, and so I figured, as I thought about it, that he probably knew the Bible more than anybody else that I knew. So I decided to ask him if he thought I would have went to heaven or hell if I died. And he just very lovingly, very patiently told me that every single one of us are created to be in a personal and intimate relationship with God. But because of our sin and because of the wrong things that we have done, we are separated from him, both relationally and eternally. And that's why Jesus died, to pay the penalty for our sins so that we can be put back into a right relationship with God, and so we can spend eternity in heaven with him. And when he told me this, I felt like what he was telling me was something more true than I'd ever heard in my life before. but I didn't want to just take his word for it. So I asked him to show me it in the Bible. And he showed me a lot of different verses, but the verse that stood out to me the most was John 14:6. And that's where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And as I read that, I just felt like Jesus could not have been more clear. He said that he was the way, the truth, and the life. And I knew that I seemed to be missing something very important and special in my life. I knew that I had never made any sort of a decision to accept Jesus, like personally, for the forgiveness of my sins and to let him lead my life. And I knew, especially after trying to take my own life, that I had a lot of sin to be forgiven for. So later that night, sitting on the floor in my parents' dining room, as I thought about all of this, I just decided to pray. And I asked God to forgive me for everything I had ever done wrong, even for trying to take my own life. I realized that night that my life wasn't mine to take, that God alone gives and takes life, and that wasn't a choice that I could make. And so I asked him to forgive me for that. I asked him to give me a new life. And as I went to sleep that night, I just felt a little bit different. I can't describe it much better than that. I just felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and like I just didn't need to worry so much about my life anymore. And I know that that was the night that I became a Christian. I would have told you my whole life that I was a Christian, but I had never made that choice. I had never made that decision. I really had no relationship with God. He was always, in my opinion, like up in the corner, far away, and not concerned with the details of my life. But that night, I know that I became a Christian. And sometimes I wish I could tell people that everything changed overnight. It was like a miraculous transformation. But it was a journey. That's the best way for me to describe it. I was on a journey. I still, even after I became a Christian, struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression very badly for about 3 years. I was in and out of college. I was in and out of jobs. I was in and out of relationships. I was even in and out of the psych ward. Often on the anniversary of my suicide attempt, I struggled the most because I would reevaluate my life and think about all of the things that I wasn't doing yet that I wanted to do. And so I would struggle a lot. And during those 3 years, even though I was going through such a hard time, God was seriously at work in some of the most incredible ways. As I look back, there was one lady, actually two ladies. There's one woman who turned out to be my counselor. And I remember, I met with her like every other week for like years. So at about around the 2-year mark, she helped me realize that even though I had accepted God's forgiveness, I had not forgiven myself for what I had done to lose my legs and forever change my life, and even the lives of my family and the people around me. I really, in many ways, was still punishing myself for the way that affected my life and for the way that affected my family's lives. So I was really hard on myself. I was still smoking, I was still drinking, and I wasn't going to church or really reading my Bible. I didn't have anybody pouring into me in that way. I was really pretty alone. And anyway, she helped me realize that I, even though I had accepted God's forgiveness, I had not forgiven myself. And she had me memorize the very first verse I ever memorized. I wrote it on a note card and put it in the car and put it on the bathroom mirror and whatever. And I just would say it to myself over and over and over again. And this was a verse from Romans 8:1. And this is what it says. It says, "Therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." So I would just say it, read that verse to myself over and over again, in following her instructions. And as I started to memorize that verse and say it to myself over and over again, "Therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus," it just started to sink down deep into my heart and into my soul. And I started to realize that if God could forgive me for trying to take my own life, and for everything I had ever done wrong, there was really no reason for me not to forgive myself, because I was no bigger, no more important, no more special, no more holy, no more anything than him. And if he can forgive me for everything I've ever done wrong. There's no reason for me not to forgive myself. And I realized that by not forgiving myself, I was really just holding myself back and making more problems and hurting myself worse. So I decided to really like make a choice to forgive myself. And it was like a continual choice, so that I could live in the freedom that God was offering me. And so I started to forgive myself, and I started to find that freedom. And not long after, I met a woman at the community college I was going to who came up to me in the parking lot one night, and she just, I don't know how to describe it except to say that she just shined with more peace and more joy and more love for life than anybody I had ever met before. And she was just sharing her story with me, like her life story. And I talked to her in the parking lot, I think for close to 2 hours that night. And as I went home and as I got ready for bed, I just said to God, I want to know you the way that lady knows you. And what I felt him tell me was, Kristen, you have to let me be your best friend. At this point in my life, I had learned to go to my doctors, my counselors, my parents, my friends, really everybody around me for help with my problems. But I really had not learned how to go to God for help with my problems. And I realized that night that God knew me, He created me, He knew me better than anyone else in this world, and He knew my problems and the answers to them better than anyone else in this world. So really, why wouldn't I go to Him for help with my problems? And I started to walk towards Him in a best friend sort of relationship. And the more I walked towards Him and the more I spent time talking to Him and praying and reading my Bible and whatnot, the more I started to feel like I was walking straight out of my depression. I got involved with a new church and I just took off. I started to experience the peace and the joy and the love for life that I always wanted but had never had before. And it was an amazing time for me because I was able to get off of all of my pain meds and even all my antidepressants that my doctors told me I would have to take for the rest of my life. And when I decided to get baptized, just to make kind of a public statement of this change in my life, at my baptism, my mom became a Christian. And it was an amazing day because she would have always said that she was a Christian as well. But she became a Christian and really started a relationship with God right after she saw me get baptized. And she started bringing my dad to church with her, and he became a Christian. He started bringing my brother to church with him, and he became a Christian. And it was just an amazing time for our family. The best word I can use to describe it is that it was very redeeming. We just found so much healing. We were changing so much as individuals and as a family. We talked about things we had never talked about before. We started praying about things we never prayed about before. We started listening to some of the same music, reading some of the same books. It was just a very, very special time. And not long after that, I got asked to share my story at the high school youth group in our church. And that wasn't something I was ever expecting to do, ever like even pursuing or thinking about. But as I prayed about it, I just felt like I didn't really want anyone ever in this world, ever to have to go through what I did or anything close to it before they realized how big and how real and how faithful God is. So I just decided to go up in front of the teenagers and share my story as openly and vulnerably as I could. And when I was done, almost every single one of them came up to me and told me that they struggle with suicidal thoughts or depression, or they knew somebody who did. And that's when I started to realize that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was, and that the struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts was a much bigger issue than I had ever realized before. And something just started to stir inside of me, and I wanted to do something to help all of those people. But I really hadn't put all the pieces together yet. And not long after, maybe about a month later, I got asked to share my story at another youth event. And I thought I would just share it one more time and hopefully it would help one more person. Seriously, I just that was what I was really hoping for. So I went and shared as openly and vulnerably as I could. And when I was done, I just had the most incredible conversations with the students afterwards. They were choosing life over death, God over sin. Like, they were making huge choices to just love themselves and find the hope and the joy that I had found. as they chose God as well. And I just couldn't believe it, because as I saw their lives starting to be transformed, it was unbelievable to me, because in many ways it made sense to me that God would use what happened in my life to help me. Everything I had been through really is, without that, I'm not sure I would have ever came into a real relationship with him. But it never, ever occurred to me that he would use everything that I had gone through to help other people. But that was happening more and more and more. And every time I would share my story, another door would open, and another door would open, and another door would open. And every time I would hope it would just help one more person, but it was helping more people than I ever dreamed. And as I prayed about that, and as I prayed about like why God kept me here and what I was supposed to do here, like I had heard in the hospital so many times, I started to realize that the biggest reason that God kept me here was so that I could come to know him in this real and personal way. But I realized at the same time that what he wanted me to do here was help other people come to know him in a real and personal way. And I knew that I especially could help people who struggle with suicidal thoughts and depression, because they were just like me. I totally understood them. So as I thought and prayed about that, I decided to start a nonprofit Christian ministry called Reaching You Ministries for people who were struggling. And at the same time, I decided I felt like I needed to go to Bible college so that I could learn as much about the Bible as possible and just kind of prepare myself for a life of ministry. And I found out that like the number one Bible college in the world at the time was about an hour away from where I lived in Chicago. So I applied and got in not long after, and started taking classes there at the Bible college, which if you knew me in high school, you would be surprised that I ever went to Bible college, but it was really one of the most special times in my life. I had so many wonderful professors and adults that were a little bit older than me, just pouring into me. And while I was in school there, I got asked to share my story on the Oprah show. And that wasn't something I was pursuing or necessarily even looking to do, but they were planning a show for suicide survivors that were using their second chance at life to make a difference in this world. And they had gotten a lot of letters about me, I guess, and they just wanted to give me a call, and they ended up deciding to add me to the show between the two other guests that they had already booked. And it was like I agreed to do it on one Wednesday, we taped the following Wednesday, and it aired the Wednesday after that. So it all happened really fast. And as soon as it aired, I got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of emails in through the ministry website that I had created. And it was amazing, it was overwhelming, it was incredible, it was all sorts of things. But there was one email in particular that came in from a young man who wrote in his email in the subject line in capital letters, which almost looked like bold print to me, "You saved my life." And as I read his story, as I opened the email and read like what he had written, he talked about how he was planning to take his life the day that I shared my story in the Oprah show that day, the day that it aired. He was planning to take his life. He was just waiting for his mom to leave for work. And as she left for work, he walked into the living room with a gun in his hand. And as he went to turn the TV off, I was on the TV talking about how I had tried to take my life, how I had survived, and how I was so grateful to still be here, how Jesus had changed everything for me. And he says that he got on his knees and prayed to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And he is now today a youth pastor leading other young people to the Lord. And I remember, though, as I read his email, just being amazed by God and how he works in the details, how he was in the details that night when I was trying to take my own life, how he was in the details that day when he was trying to take his own life, and how he's in the details of our everyday when we don't even realize it. I was just in awe of who God is. And not long after the show aired, I also got asked to write my story in a book, and I was getting speaker requests all over the world. Up until that point, I had only ever shared my story in publicly in like Illinois or Wisconsin. I had not done any speaking events anywhere else, but I was getting, asked to speak in Pakistan and all sorts of places. And I knew that many of these places I might not ever be able to go, but I didn't really want to hold my story back if it could help anybody over there. So I just felt like if God wanted to use my story in any way like that, I wanted to let him do that. So I ended up agreeing to work with an amazing Christian author who had an amazing story of her own, and she was willing to write it with me and not just for me, which was really important to me. And so we started working on it together at that time, and it took about 2+ years for us to write it. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. It was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done. But like most things in my life, the hardest things I've ever done are some of the things that are the most worth it, that have made the biggest difference. And so anyways, I remember after it came out, and after the publishers had decided on the title, just feeling like, gosh, I could not have picked a better title myself. The title that they gave it, I actually have one here. The title that they gave it is Life in Spite of Me. And the reason I love that, and the reason I felt like I could not have ever picked a better title myself, is because I would have never thought of it, but God has certainly given me life physically, spiritually, and emotionally, all in spite of my sin, in spite of my mistakes. He's given me a second chance at life when I didn't even deserve it. And so I am really, really, really grateful to still be here. And I'm really grateful that I could still, share my story with you tonight. There's so much more I could say. But if you fast forward to now, this book is now in 8 languages. And I am married with 3 little kids and 2 older kids that my husband brought into our marriage. I think I have a picture here. Just a second. Yeah, I posted this recently. This is like a Christmas picture that we just took. So you can just see. And the little ones, we named all of them in honor of God's grace. The best way that I have ever had grace described to me is grace is when God gives us favor and we don't even deserve it. And I really believe that he has done that for me. I just knew pretty quickly early on that he's the one who kept me here. And I'm so glad to know him now. I'm so glad for everything that I've learned through this. Obviously, it's been very, very, very hard, but it has changed my life for the better. I've learned so much about life. I've learned so much about God, and I will never, ever regret surviving. I am really, really, really happy to still be here. And I want to talk a little bit tonight or today. It's not really that late. What time is it? 2:30 Central Time. I just want to talk a little bit about the struggle with suicidal thoughts and depression. So sometimes I think people think that because I am a Christian and because I have found so much peace and so much joy and a love for life, I don't ever struggle with suicidal thoughts or depression anymore. And that's not quite accurate. I still have fleeting thoughts, and depression is something I am always very careful I'm always trying to stay out of a depression. I think depression is a slippery slope, and it's very easy to slide down into a depression. And so there's a lot of things that I do to try and keep myself healthy mentally, emotionally, physically. And one of the things that's helped me a lot is just as I read the Bible, learning about so many things. But there's one verse that I've thought a lot about recently, which it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, and it was written by Paul, and this is just what he said. He said, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me." And one of the reasons that's been so helpful for me, sorry, I'm just going to log back into my computer here. One of the reasons that's been so helpful for me is because right before this, it talks about how he felt like there was a thorn in his flesh. He had pleaded with God to take it away from him 3 times, but it was never taken away. And that's how I feel like depression is for me. It is something that I will always struggle with, but it is something that I as a weakness, if you want to call it that, I know that I can find, because of that being my weakness, that is one way that God can show his power. The more that I lean on him, the more that I learn how to find my peace and my joy and a love for life through him in spite of that struggle. So I just want to encourage you guys, if you have been continually struggling even after becoming a Christian, I just want to encourage you to continue to seek him with everything in you. And I wanted to do this live video just to kind of like get my feet wet a little bit, because I know that I need to be doing more of these. I really want to. I feel like I'm supposed to. And I want to do some more giveaways, and I appreciate you guys for hanging in there with me. I am going to give away 2 copies of the book again during this live video. So if you are interested in a copy and you don't have one, or you know somebody who you would like to give it to, please send me a message through this Facebook page and just say, a little bit about why you want it, and or who you want it for. And we'll do a drawing, and we'll give away 2, and we'll mail them next week. So I appreciate you guys for being with me. Please message, hi Tony. If you have any questions, I have so much more to say. I didn't really get into what I wanted to at the end as much as I had planned, but I will do that again soon, and I will talk to you later. Thank you guys. Have a great day. God bless you.